see so I can get in here with me. All right, we are live. So tonight is going to be something new and different. Instead of having a guest, I am going to have my dog Maximus here causing problems already. He is absolutely intent on interrupting the stream. Yes, thank you, Max. You're being very helpful. Can you guys hear me all right? Everything coming in loud and clear to everybody? I've never done this without someone else on the camera with me to know if I'm doing it right. So, all right. Everything sounds good. Okay. So what we're doing tonight is we're going to be doing reactions, and I've went through the Discord, and a bunch of people gave me suggestions of videos to look at. So I've got those videos queued up. I've got them at 1.75 times speed, so we don't have to sit around and hear people talking at normal speed. And we're going to see what they have to say and kind of react in real time. This is apparently a big thing among the Gen Z kids. I myself have never done a reaction video, so you're learning with me. And if this is terrible, what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to delete it and pretend that this never happened. All right. So we're going to start by watching my top 3 tips for getting into Dungeons and Dragons. This is by Puffin Forest. He has 735,000 subscribers, so he's kind of a big deal. He is 380 times bigger than me, I think. So he's kind of a big deal. Let's see what he says. All right, now can you guys hear the video that I'm playing? I want to make sure. Okay, so you guys are not able to hear those videos. So let's figure that out. Let's rewind here. Let's rewind. And how do we do this here? Let's see. Let's see here. No sound. Can you guys hear me? You guys can hear me, right? Let's see. All right, you can hear me. So let's see now. How do we do audio? Echo cancellation, reduce micro. Okay. Guests. Huh. I thought there was a way to be able to hear screen shares. Let's see. Anybody a master of StreamYard that knows how to do this? Let's see. I guess not. All right. All right, let's see, gentlemen. We're having some technical challenges. These things are very hard. So I'm gonna have to pantomime. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go. I don't know here. I mean, there must be a way to do it because everybody does it. So let's think here. Let's see, general. Cameras are working. Okay. Audio. Okay. This could be the shortest axe to grind ever. Let's see. How do I? Okay. Okay. So, all right. We're gonna try this again here. And we're gonna also share. Ah, okay. 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 All right. I think we've got it. I think we've got it, guys, here. All right. All right. Is it working now?
Sometimes I get messages from people saying that they've watched my videos and they want to get into Dungeons & Dragons and roleplaying because it sounds like great magical fun time adventures, but don't know how, and they want to know my advice. I've got another question for you. Why? Have you not watched like the last 40 videos I've made? I mean,
All right.
you'd realize I just complain about the games I've been in, where I yell at people, punch people in the face, try to get my character killed off, and try and ruin games. You'd think I'd have some kind of personal vendetta against it or something, and I'm quietly trying to end the hobby and bury it out back where no one can find it. But no, some of you think D&D is about being with friends and having fun.
All right, so my immediate reaction here is that this guy is way more well-produced than I am. There's obviously either a very talented videographer involved, or a whole team of folks. Interestingly enough, this format that he's using of voice with animation was actually pioneered by the Escapists. We were the very first people to do this format. It was then widely copied with extra credits, copying 0 punctuation, and then many people copying 0 punctuation and extra credits.
Seriously, though, I complain about the things I love. First off, I need to clarify in case you guys don't already know. Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop RPG. One game of many. It's hard to get exact numbers on what the most popular tabletop RPGs are. I would guess in no particular order. Pathfinder, Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, Star Wars, Edge of the Empire, and the Vampire of the Masquerade? Sailor Moon? Sailor Moon? The RPG? Anyone? No? I don't know. You might be wondering, if there are all these other...
I mean, it would be nice if ACKS was in there. We know that ACKS is not in there yet, but one day it will be in there.
There are RPGs out there. Why would I play Dungeons & Dragons? Why not pick one of the other ones? That's a good question. You could. It's possible. But with D&D, it's a bit easier if you want to find an active group because there's more people playing it and a lot more people are familiar with it.
So this is absolutely correct. So I've talked about this elsewhere. This is the concept of the network effect. A comic book or a graphic novel or a novel is as valuable to you to enjoy, regardless of how many other people have read it. Maybe it's a little bit more valuable if you want to have like water cooler conversation about it or talk on Reddit or something. But by and large, the project stands by itself. But a role-playing game is really only as valuable as the value of the community that you can play it with, and that is ultimately what makes D&D the constant winner in these things. It's its network effect, and it's why I've put so much effort into trying to grow my network for ACKS.
It has more streamlined rules, depending on what game you're comparing it to, and so on. So this video is going to be focused
Okay, that's just simply not true.
on getting into D&D, even though you could technically pick any of them. So my first step to getting into D&D is go to an Adventurers League game. I've talked about it in another video, but Adventurers League is hosted by Wizards of the Coast, where they run a series of games every week. It doesn't cost any money. You can go there, get into a session, they will set you up with everything you need and teach you the rules. When it comes to house games, those are very personal. You kind of got to know someone to get in, and even when you do, they'll sometimes want a blood pact for the next few years of your life if you want to stay.
So that's really strange advice to me, the idea that you should get into role-playing games by going to a game store and playing with perfect strangers. I don't actually think that's good advice. I think much better advice today would be to watch some videos of people playing the game, buy a copy of the rules, and play it with friends that you already have mutual trust with. Um, yeah.
Ideally, you want to get your friends to play an RPG with you because most of the fun in playing an RPG is that you're doing it with friends.
All right,
So
so
my
now-
second tip is get your friends involved.
All right, so now he's going there.
A lot of times when I talk to people about getting into tabletop RPGs, they complain that none of their friends have played before and probably aren't interested. Well, have you tried bringing it up to them? I think there might be more interest there than you think. I remember one of my friends posting the Dungeons & Dragons books on his Facebook saying, reading through these at work. And he got a lot of hits from people saying things like, oh wow, that's so cool. I've heard about that game, including myself. And that's how I got my first invite to a group. Apparently, a lot more of our friends knew about D&D than we thought. Another thing, even...
All right, so this is kind of wild because clearly he hasn't been playing Dungeons & Dragons that long. Like, he just discovered it recently enough that the recent edition is his first edition.
And if they don't know what D&D is, why don't you introduce them to it? Have they ever played any video game ever? If they have, that might be a good place to start. It is possible that you can convert your friends to D&D nerds by evangelizing to them about it. If not, your friend's infective. You need to get new friends. Third tip is, as far as stuff to buy, I would recommend starting with the 5th edition starter set. However, you aren't going to buy it because everyone else just buys the 3 core rulebooks, the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual, as well as a bunch of dice. If this is your first time running a game, I would suggest starting out maybe reading a module because it will give you a good idea how the game is run. Although, when it comes to reading modules, I've had mixed reactions because some people find them rather complicated and overwhelming.
Okay, so we're at the point in the story where the basic act of reading a module in order to run a session is now overwhelming and scary. Look, if reading is overwhelming and scary, then probably the Dungeons and Dragons hobby is just simply not for you.
Hopefully this might help you guys out and give you a place to get started. I might make some more tutorial videos on role-playing coming down the line. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, that was interesting. That was interesting. Meh. Wasn't anything terribly wrong, but wasn't terribly exciting either. All right, so let's see now. What happens if I... Okay, so I deleted that tab, and now we're gonna share another one here. I'm gonna share another tab. All right. So here we go.
So I took over one of my players' characters who turned into a villain, but now what do I do with it? I can't just do whatever I want because there was a player who played that character beforehand and set a certain precedent. And once it turns, I do have to honor that. So I took over this sorcerer as now my NPC, and I had to decide how much of a villain he truly would be. So what did I end up doing? I had to think about what did this character do with his own allies that were around the table. He was using his allies as a tool to gain power. So he would do the same thing with the BBEG. So he goes to the BBEG, he joins the side of the BBEG, but to use him as a tool for more power. So to the players, this looks real bad, actually, because it looks like he's fully gone to the dark side and now joined side by side next to the villain. But there's a little bit more to it than that. In my head as a dungeon master, I thought of the character's backstory, and through all this power, he would gain and gain and gain and get to the spot where he would learn something about his history caused from the person he is now standing side by side to, turning into a monster. But the players threw me a huge curveball. Follow for that tomorrow.
All right, so that was actually pretty decent advice. He didn't use the terminology I use, but he was very relatable. And essentially what he said is, I'm going to abduct the motivation and behavior of this character based on what's come before in the campaign world in order to maintain verisimilitude of the character's personality. And I think that was a really responsible way to handle it. That was good advice. I don't know who this man is. His name is the Dungeon Coach, but seems like an affable fellow. So good job, Dungeon Coach. Yeah. All right. So let's see what we got next. All right. So next up. So this fellow is called Carp the DM. That's fantastic. All right, let's see what Carp the DM says about how dungeon masters justify everything. And again, I'm watching these for the first time. I didn't pre-watch these. I have no idea who these people are. A bunch of you sent me links, and I just clicked on those links and opened them in my browser. So here we go.
The beauty of D&D, you got magic. Let me let you in on a little tip. If you need anything to make sense in your D&D campaign, know that there's always magic. That stops working when you're like 3 or 4 years old, and then comes back into your life the moment you start DM. The beauty.
All right. I mean, he's not wrong. You can get away with anything through magic. I was just reading History of Middle-earth a little bit because of the discussion on elves that we're working on for Before All Others. And it's actually very funny how often the answer to what's going on Middle-earth is just, Iluvatar said so. You're like, well, yeah, normally this isn't allowed to happen, but Iluvatar said so, so it's fine. And Tolkien just runs with it, and it totally works in his world. So I think, you know, if you otherwise put the work in to make a really good setting, and then you have some sort of cosmic being that occasionally messes with the rules, I think it's probably fine. So all right, so let's see the next one we got here. All right, so this is Dungeon Wise. He is also going to be talking about what is the best way to start a game of D&D. Don't know who this fellow is, but let's see what he has to say.
Best way to start a game of D&D as a dungeon master.
So he has a cool foreign accent, which I think is worth bonus points in terms of being appealing on YouTube. I wish that I had a cool foreign accent. I've always thought I would do well with one of those sort of indecipherably Eastern European accents that James Bond villains seem to have. I think that would really work for me. But unfortunately, I'm stuck with a bland Midwestern American accent.
Master, you need to prepare a strong start for your session. If you instantly capture the attention of your players, you will have a better game. The starting scene is the only part of the session you have complete control over. Make it count. Combat works great. Attack the players or something they hold dear. If that doesn't work for your story, give them a vision or an omen. Always try to start in the middle of the action. What is...
Okay, so Dungeon Wise clearly comes at the philosophy of game mastering from a very different place than I do. And that is evident in two things. So one, he is discussing it in terms of scenes, and he suggests that the only time you have complete control is at the start of the scene of the first session, as if that's a bad thing. So losing that control is something that's sad, and so you should make the best of it while you have it. So obviously, I suspect if we watched a bunch of his videos, we would find differences in philosophy that are quite profound, and they become very evident right there from those initial directions. All right, so let's see what else we got.
Coming up with a plot, vetting
Okay, hang on here.
your players' characters, gathering battle maps, making minis, checking stat blocks, and like 5,000 other tasks. You are finally playing.
Okay, so I guess we're back to Pointy Hat now. He seems to have fewer subscribers for this video, so I'm a little puzzled by that.
Your D&D campaign. And then it dies. Drama happens, people don't show up to the game, you start taking longer and longer breaks, and before you know it, that campaign is dead in the water. What do? Well,
Okay, that was pretty funny. I loved the over-dramatic cinematics and the sound and everything. That was pretty funny.
Tony D'Amico, this is Pointy Hat, and we're about to make sure this never happens on this episode of Tip of the Hat.
Obligatory fedora man there to tip the hat.
There's approximately 700,000 videos that go 7 tips your mom didn't tell you about when playing D&D. So why make another one? Well, I think that the advice here is...
All right, so we've achieved true levels of internet meta here, because I'm doing a reaction to his commentary on why he's creating another listicle about listicles. Okay.
To toot my own toot. Kinda rare in these D&D streets. I'm not gonna focus on stuff like, I don't know, the best level to play campaigns at, or if potions should or shouldn't be a bonus action. I'll leave those questions to the philosophers. I want to concentrate on stuff that is seldom given shine to, so that people get some actual value out of this video.
Okay, this is interesting footage. I mean, this is old school OG D&D footage. So Pointy Hat clearly has a good budget for video.
I think many people are not aware of what an insane social tightrope a D&D campaign truly is. And I
That's definitely true. It's definitely true.
think a lot of D&D advice out there doesn't focus on this, which is wild to me because, in my experience, these are the reasons why campaigns fail. Yes, it's hard to get it all together at the same time, at the same place consistently, but it's also a deeply personal activity that requires a lot of emotional maturity and, the bane of all nerd spaces, social skills. It's 5 people, sometimes more, all needing to gel and work together while they perform a sometimes downright emotionally taxing extended improv exercise where
Whoa. Okay. So here we have some differences of philosophy becoming apparent, as he is approaching D&D as what it fundamentally is what he's showing here in Critical Role, that it is an extended exercise in improv, and that is not correct. So I'm going to be interested to see where he goes with this, but I think he's fundamentally on the wrong foot about what it is to play Dungeons and Dragons.
where people tend to put a lot of their personal hangups into. It's basically the social equivalent of a minefield. Wait.
Okay, so I mean, if that's what you think, then a lot of the context in which we see things like trigger warnings and whatnot in the game campaigns make more sense. But I would again stress that I don't think that this is a correct assessment of what people should be doing when they sit down to play a role-playing game. Interesting.
This reads like I'm discouraging you from playing a campaign, and that's not my goal. My point is that it can be done. Very much so. I've DM'd and played in multiple year-long campaigns that were happening every single week and that ended, but I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you don't do the groundwork. So put on your hard hat, don't look too hard at all the OSHA violations, and come with me as we make sure your D&D campaign doesn't combust into flames. Before any DM tries to run anything though, they're gonna need one thing, and that is monsters. Conjurers the world over have tried to summon monsters from every plane of existence. And although any second-rate magus can send for a closet, it takes a true arch-conjurer to call forth the good stuff. Or at least,
I think we're about to have sponsored content.
the Archconjurer's Writings, a summoning grimoire that can invite any beast, fiend, or beyond from the confines of the multiverse. But where would one acquire?
So Kent Rip says it may be possible that Alex really hasn't seen much of D&D tube. And the answer is no, I haven't. I genuinely don't really care what most other people think. So I have not watched very much. You guys are literally watching me watch D&D YouTube for the very first time. The only shows I've ever watched are the shows that people have invited me on.
Acquire such an artifact? Well, there's a Kickstarter for it about to.
There it is. There's the sponsored content. All right, we're gonna skip ahead, buddy. Okay. All right.
This video is going to touch on the social aspect of campaigns, the things that nerds tend to completely forgo when they're planning to start a campaign. And you don't often see these tips in videos. I mean, I had not, so listen up. In my experience, people will come up with like 70 kinds of magic radishes and the economics of Demonville Valley until the cows come home, but will neglect to ensure that the most indispensable aspect of playing a campaign, the people that play it, are set up for success. So we're going to do that today. And we're going to do it through
a numbered list.
Because y'all love them for some
So it is indeed a listicle.
reason. Who am I kidding? I love them too. Let's go. Number 1, setting expectations. This step is the first step because it's crucial in setting everyone up for success. Literally all other steps rely on this one happening first and happening well. I think there are many DMs out there that never sit down to actually think of this at all. And then there are other DMs that have an idea of their expectations and just never communicate them. I guess those are relying on the player's mystical magical power of telepathy to do the work for them.
Stop relying on that body.
I'm just curious, how did that work out last time? Badly? Oh, wow. Who would have thought? Setting expectations involves 2 steps on its own. Coming up with the expectations for your campaign and successfully communicating this expectation to your players. So what do I mean by expectations? Well, I'm glad you asked. This somebody voice that sets up my scripts for me. Is this campaign roleplay heavy, combat heavy? You were gonna say a mix of both, right? I knew it. This is a very bad way to come up with expectations for you and your players. Be specific, because roleplay heavy or combat heavy mean completely different things to completely different people. Dungeon delvers might think a campaign is roleplay heavy if it involves basically any roleplaying at all, whereas theater kids might consider a campaign combat heavy if it has like a dungeon every 10 sessions to break up the angsty crying.
So this all right, so clearly we are in a foreign universe here. We are entering a strange twilight zone where people play a hobby differently than I do. So we're gonna, the person has 428,000 subscribers, so I would assume they're intelligent, just have a different philosophy than I do. So I'm going to see where they go with this. We're strangers in a strange land here, axe friends.
What idea I tell my players there will
Some people consider skipping ads to be a faux pas. Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to commit the faux pas. I don't feel obligated to do a reaction to his ad. Oh, well, skipping ads while reacting to it specifically. Yeah, well, I guess I've committed a faux pas. I don't think that pointy hat is going to be made or broken by my audience of 2,000 subscribers that gets about 750 video views in an episode. So I think if the tables were turned, perhaps the argument would be stronger. In any event, it's done.
Will be plenty of time for roleplay, but I also aim to have at least 1 combat encounter per session. Not always, but I never go 2 sessions without combat, and combat will happen way more often when they enter a dungeon. There, see, I set specific expectations not just for my players, but also for myself.
So that's very interesting. So he's deciding in advance how much combat is going to occur each session. He's not allowing the players to decide. So this to me is the opposite of the sort of thing that a game master should be doing.
People now know exactly how often combat will happen and in what circumstances.
So people know exactly how often combat will happen and in what circumstances. So I feel as though I have entered an alternative universe where incredibly influential people are being hugely successful by giving bad advice.
So is that it? Are we done setting expectations? No. How deadly is your campaign? Is death possible at all? If it is, how possible
is death possible at all? All right. Well, maybe they're playing a superhero game, but it seems strange that if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, that's an expectation you have to set.
Death. Will players have to bring up a backup character with them at all times? Is resurrection a thing? How much of a thing is it? Is it easy to do or is it hard? Dealing with death is a whole thing in and of itself. We'll do a video on it. At one point, this game seems like it never runs out of topics to make videos about, but it's important to set this expectation because death can make or break a game and it can make or break a campaign. Setting expectations early is basically obligatory to have your campaign actually survive. Survive death, I guess.
I mean, he's not wrong in that regard.
We're phrasing. Moving on. Is your campaign a linear narrative, a non-linear narrative, a sandbox game? This one will be more or less important.
Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting that he mentions sandbox. So he acknowledges the existence of sandbox.
To your players. For me, this will literally decide if I want to play in your game at all. I made an entire video on what these 3 styles of narratives are and why I like linear the most.
Okay, well, there we have it. So I was right. It's interesting. You can very quickly detect where a person's coming from just from how they view even minor issues. So we'll scroll back. We saw he had a little, where was it here?
players. For me, this will literally decide if I want to play in your game at all. I made an entire video on what these 3
Yeah, so railroading is good, actually.
styles of narratives are and why I like linear the most. I
And
like it at
why
the end.
I like linear the most. Okay, so so clearly Pointy Hat is very, very successful with emphasizing railroad style games. I guess he's a railroad apologist. I mean, it's interesting. He admits actually it's good. A few years ago, it was almost taken for granted that it's good. So there definitely has been a little bit of a revival of alternative styles of play.
End of this video, but the short answer here is linear does not mean railroading. A linear adventure is an adventure where there is causality between the order of events. X happens, then Y happens because X happened, and after Y happens, Z happens. Baldur's Gate 3 is a linear adventure. All linear adventures have non-linear bits to them. The main plot of Baldur's Gate 3 is very linear. Don't recite the old magic at me. I was there when it was written. Non-linear adventure is an adventure where X, Y, and Z can happen in any order. Breath of the Wild is a non-linear adventure. A sandbox adventure is one where there are no predetermined events. There's no X or Y or Z. The story basically happens whenever the players make a choice to go to a place.
So it's interesting that even in describing a sandbox campaign, he can't get away from the narrative worldview. So he says a sandbox campaign is, let's listen to that again. That was interesting.
I was there when it was written. Non-linear adventure is an adventure where X, Y, and Z can happen in any order. Breath of the Wild is a non-linear adventure. A sandbox adventure is one where there are no predetermined events. There's no X or Y or Z. The story basically happens whenever the players make a choice to go to a place. There's no.
So the story basically happens whenever the players make a choice. Yeah, so he's definitely coming from a very different tradition. And it's interesting. He seems to have as his baseline that video games, right? Like he's using as examples of the different styles of play, he's using the video games. But of course, we know from the history of gaming that most of those video games were themselves originally inspired by tabletop games. So it's very meta. Okay, so that's interesting. So this is good. We've kind of stumbled on someone where we can disagree with, but we're not, we're not here to flame or burn anyone. It's just interesting to see how others think.
Overarching plot. People are extremely particular about stuff like this, even if they don't know they are and they don't know these terms. If you ever take a trip to D&D Reddit, or I don't know, the Turbo Hell that is D&D Twitter, you'll find plenty of people.
Hey now, I just would like to clarify that D&D Twitter is great and D&D Reddit is Turbo Hell.
Saying we played for 10 sessions and never found the plot, or it felt like we were just going through the plot the DM had laid out for us instead of our own adventure. This is the result of people coming into a campaign with their own expectations. But if players have their own preferences, how are you going to make it so that everyone likes it? Well, this is my voice. Again, I'm so glad you asked. Let's talk about that. 2, choose your players. So I'm going to go ahead and say something controversial, be brave, and something that people don't want to hear. But here it goes. Not all your friends are D&D friends. Have you heard that old wisdom of not every friend can be a roommate? I believe
This is good advice.
the exact same thing happens in D&D. You can appeal to your players all you want. At the end of the day, there are things that you are either not interested in running and they want to play, or things you very much want to run but they don't want to play. One of my best friends hates linear and non-linear adventures, preferring sandbox above all. I am literally the exact opposite. We don't play together. We can't, because what we are looking for in this game are wildly different experiences. Another one of my friends is a dungeon delving maniac that loves a dungeon with a number of floors in the triple digits, and another one will start to lose interest if a dungeon is longer than 2 sessions. Those two will just not be happy playing in the same game, and forcing them to will make it so at least one of them is unhappy.
Yeah, so this is very good advice. He's right. It is definitely the case that not everyone is going to want the same things, and that is okay. And I respect the fact that he is not passing judgment. He is simply stating it as different preferences. I respect that.
The DM bending over backwards to accommodate both will result in a campaign that appeals to them some of the time and a campaign that they can't stand to play in for the remainder of the time. As harsh as that is, that campaign is either doomed to fail or doomed to have a player that resiliently endures a game they don't like to hang out with friends. Either way, not great. What is the solution to this? Choose your players. Yes, I know D&D is already hard to play because of how many people you need in order to play, but I assure you, having a game that ends with supposed to end, where people are happy to play it, is just better than having a game that peters out because half the people there are miserable during it. But there are very much ways to mitigate this. Let me list them. Oh, I'm already numbered this. Number A, make smaller groups. Did you know that the D&D Council is not allowed to send assassin snipers to your house if you play a game with less than 5 people? It's true. Since 1952, they changed it. I have played a campaign where it was just the DM and 2 players, and I was one of them, so if I didn't manage to sink it to the ground, you can too. Plenty of fantastic games can be run with less than the suggested number of players, just like a game can run with more than the suggested number of players. I don't know, I can think of a few. Number B.
So that's definitely the case. I've run great campaigns with 2 or 3 players, and I've run great campaigns with up to 14 players. So I think that's definitely true. What's interesting here is the conventionality of the worldview. So clearly, like the notion of a sandbox campaign is somewhat outside of Pointy Hat's comfort zone. And I suspect that confronted with the notion of like a one-to-one campaign with multiple assistant GMs running in a freewheeling Bro SR style, sort of smoke would come out of their ears. It seems inconceivable. So
make smaller campaigns. This is something that I'm working on.
Is this how you always listen to videos? No, I've never done this before, Edens. This is literally the first time I've ever looked at any of these channels or ever looked to see what my competitors have to say. And I don't even know if they're really my competitors, because for the most part, I make my money making games and I just do the YouTube for fun and to sort of put myself out there. So no, this is not how I always listen to videos. Actually, how I usually listen to videos is I take the URL of the video and I type it into I type it into Chat GPT and ask it to summarize them for me. Oh, you mean the speed? Oh, yeah, this is the speed I normally listen to them at, but I can turn it down if it's too fast for you guys. Yeah, normally I'll actually listen to them at 2 times speed, but I'll turn it down to 1.5.
For myself. I don't have tips for this yet.
All right.
I'm trying my best. If you want to play with your
I have
friends,
it at-
but your
I'll
friends
put
want
it at
different games and you
1.5.
want to run both of the types of games your friends like, important point there, you, the DM, also need to have fun. You can accomplish this much easier by running shorter campaigns. Yes, campaigns that last 4 years are impressive, but I happen to think it's also much easier to run them. Running a campaign that is short, I'm talking 4 sessions, 6 sessions, I find that really, really hard to do and still give the same emotional significance that a longer campaign has. This is my personal D&D.
I mean, it's true. Running yeah, you guys don't do that? You can just take the URL of videos and you just sort of give it to ChatGPT and it'll give you a summary. So like if I'm trying to use videos for work to, for instance, like let's say I'm trying to learn how to improve my Amazon Kindle success, and I see 10 videos with, these are the 18 ways to improve your Amazon Kindle or whatever. I don't know which ones are good or bad, and I don't have time to sit through 18, 20-minute videos. So I just use ChatGPT to summarize them, and then the ones that seem interesting, I go watch, and the others I skip. So it works really well. It's a huge time saver. Yeah, I've actually got the third-party app that can go up to as fast as I want, but past 2x, I'm no longer able to keep track. I bet the Grey Brotherhood would love only 1 combat per session. The Grey Brotherhood, we do have only 1 combat per session, but it's the entire session. YouTube does that natively now. If you swipe on the comment bar, it goes to the AI. Wow, what black magic is this? If I listened like this, I would also prefer ChatGPT. You know what? That's fair. That is fair. I don't trust AI to really get the point, and I listen to nuances as much as bottom lines. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's a difference also when you're listening for entertainment versus listening for work, because the problem is that YouTube is filled with a lot of bad videos. And so if you're, let's say, for instance, if I go to my feed and I'm trying to find out specific information about, new changes in the Amazon algorithm or something, there'll be like 10 different guys who are all saying it, and it's really hard to know which one to believe in. And I'm not an avid enough YouTuber that I figured out, like, well, this is the YouTuber that I can trust. I just don't have that yet. So anyway, I use YouTube's transcripts. I remove timestamps, select the whole log, copy, paste into text file, and then I parse the text for things. I also have done that. I use the transcript sometimes. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so let's see
Goal
here.
for 2024 to run a D&D campaign that caps out at 6 to 8 sessions at most. Dimension 20 style. My favorite.
Okay, so this is interesting. So he's saying he wants to run shorter campaigns, but he wants them to have the emotional valence of longer campaigns. Now, I think that's actually very difficult to do. And he's correct to say that shorter campaigns don't usually have the emotional intensity of longer campaigns. And the reason for that is that when you play a campaign, you're creating a shared world. People are becoming more and more invested over time. And in a sense, the reality is created through that long-term mutual interaction. And so I think if you're not a theater kid who can easily sort of method act your way into feeling deep emotion, and you have to get there through long-term immersion, it's much tougher to have a long campaign with that level of emotion. That said, that level of emotion is not the only reason to play an RPG. Like, it can be fun to play an RPG for the tactical challenge. It can be fun to play an RPG to explore a particular character, or to explore a different section of a world. And so I think there's a lot of good reasons to have short campaigns. And I don't think I would judge the success of a short campaign on whether it necessarily matched, any particular emotional intensity or longeval experience.
Favorite example of this, and the thing I send to people that are D&D curious, is Critical Role's Exandria Unlimited, Calamity, Chronicles of the Revelations, Memories, and Knuckles. I think that's testament to how impactful and emotionally fulfilling a short campaign can be, which also frees you up to play more campaigns with different combinations of players. I've run year-plus campaigns for, well, years, and towards the end, I get massive burnout.
I am tired.
I suspect this wouldn't be much of an issue if this campaign took me 2 to 4 months to run instead of, 17. And finally, number C. I gotta say the obvious because sometimes it's not that obvious. Be honest with your players, saying, I really want to run a dungeon delving game, and I know you won't enjoy that. So
be honest with their players, except when you're rolling the dice, in which case you should lie to them and fudge.
instead of forcing yourself to join something you won't like, I think it's better if we wait for the next campaign for you to play. And in the meantime, let's make sure we run some one-shots so we get to play together. That will go a long way here. Contrary to popular belief, I do not believe that bad D&D is better than no D&D. We're all very busy adults with very busy lives. Stop, Mom! I told you to not! Being honest and open with the reasons why you think a player won't be a good fit is important. Ugh, okay.
Yeah, so Beck to Corbin says burnout is less of an issue if you don't overscript things. That is absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. Joseph, roll the dice in the open. 100% agree. I was being sarcastic. I roll the dice in the open and don't fudge. 100% agree. Well said.
Enough of this emotional maturity stuff. Back to tips for play pretend. We've set expectations, we've chosen our players, now it's time to 3. Make it easy on yourself. It's important to note that a lot of times campaigns end because of DMs. Got the elephant in the room here. For the entirety of this video, we've been addressing how to manage players. So it's now time for the control freaks at the table. DM burnout is very real. Believe me, I know. And while I've personally never ended a campaign because of burnout, I've definitely seen some end because of just that. Real talk for a second. In my last year plus campaign, I spent the last 5 or so sessions actively fighting against myself because I just didn't want to run it at all. I was very much burnt out. The prep I used to love doing now felt like this massive chore on par with a full-time job. The 4 to 5 hours of play that used to fly by were now just a reminder of just how much time this was taking away from my already limited free time. See, I stopped seeing it as free time. Running the game was a job. And not a job I enjoyed, actually. I pushed through because I knew we were so close to the end, but it was rough. And now I'm still recovering from it. I'm about to play in a campaign, but I don't know when I'll be back to running.
This guy's videography is hilarious. Just, kudos to whoever puts these things together. This is just really well done.
Knowing me. Whenever an idea pops out from the tall grass, it'd be a matter of minutes before I start prepping again. And yes, a shorter campaign would have definitely helped, but you know what else would have helped? Not doing the literal most every single time for every single session. Everyone does the most differently. But if you're a prepper like me, this can be very much an issue. Once again, I actively enjoy prepping, but a campaign is a marathon. And once you've run a marathon for more than a year, you might get just like a tinsy bit tired. In this last campaign, I decided that every important NPC was going to have a fully drawn, fully colored illustration for absolutely no reason. I also made every single monster they fought custom, like nothing from a book. I added like 5 different unique rule sets, from potion creation to a companion system. All combat had its own unique battle map, and these were all battle maps done by me. Now, you might look at that and say, well, of course you burnt out. That's crazy. But here's the thing. In my many talks with many DMs, I found out that specifically DMs that enjoy prep like I do all have versions of these tasks that, yes, can be very cool and add a lot to your campaign, but can also be extremely tiring. Maybe not all boss monsters need custom art. Maybe you can take some existing monsters from the books you buy instead of constantly making your own. Maybe it's a good idea to just look for maps online or draw them on grid paper. Maybe not every NPC needs a specific song to play when they arrive. Maybe not every enemy needs a mini. Maybe you don't need terrain pieces for every combat. Yes, all of
Woo! All right. Well, that was interesting. So I've always considered myself a high prep GM, but if this is sort of the standard that other people consider to be high prep, then I am a low prep GM. I do not create a custom monster for every monster. I don't have a custom miniature for every miniature. I don't have custom pieces of terrain. I steal maps as if I was the Dread Pirate Roberts plundering ships. Interesting. That would definitely contribute to a lot of burnout if that's how people feel that they need to act.
these might seem doable now, but will they still be doable 5 months in, 8 months in, 12 months in? It's time to take a step back, especially if your instinct is, I want to blow my players away with spectacle, and look at what's feasible in the long run for your own sanity. Okay, so you've set expectations with you and your players, you've chosen
That was a really impressive miniature collection.
those players, and you have made sure to make things doable for yourself in the long run. It's now time to tackle one of the 2 final bosses of D&D. 4. Avoid drama. Avoid it. Easy. Okay, we're done with that. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Leave at least a 45% tip, or whatever Americans have decided is the acceptable amount instead of paying their waiters. And, okay, fine, I'll do the thing. Drama is, as many wise philosophers have pointed out,
He's a killer in this industry.
drama ends campaigns. I have been in one that ended like that. It was not fun. And while the reasons why drama happens or doesn't are as varied as the drama itself, and I heartily encourage you to share them in the comments because I'm messy and nosy, and I want people to learn, of course. But also, I want to know, the one through line that connects all possible drama sources at the table is that the reasons behind it are always social in nature. Drama is a social conflict. Now, it's important to say that stuff like setting expectations for your campaign and ensuring that the players that will enjoy this game are the ones playing it will actually do a lot to avoid drama in general. But it's also important to say that you can do all of this and still have drama happen. What we can do to minimize the chance of drama arising in a D&D group is to put social safeguards up, since as
Woo! All right. Well, this is interesting. All right. We'll see where he goes with this.
we have established, drama is just a catchy, messy word for a social problem. That's right, people in my comments that get mad at pronouns or whatever y'all get mad at these days. I'm gonna talk about safety tools. Safety tools are good to avoid drama. If everyone in the group shares things
Okay. Interesting. So we're definitely well into territory that's outside where I typically roll.
that they are not cool with at all, and things that they are okay with them being referred to but not described at length, this automatically eliminates a ton of sources of drama. This is commonly referred to as lines and veils, lines being things that you're not cool with them happening, and veils being things that you're cool with them being referenced but not described at length, or otherwise getting the spotlight. As example, I always put, God, you know I'm not doing good with YouTube right now. Let's call it unclothed wrestling competitions as a veil for me. I'm very much cool with the DM going, and then you do that, and that's it. I would rather eat a bowl of thumbtacks than have my friends, I can't even say it, the image of it is so cringy to me. I would rather die than have my friends sit there describing it to me?
Describe it.
No, I guess I shouldn't yuck someone's yum, but God, would I not be okay with that? No, thank you. If there was no space to clearly state that anywhere, a player could very much innocently cross that, and they wouldn't be in the wrong for doing so per se, because I never said I wasn't cool with that, but it would for sure make me, like, uncomfortable. Can you see how stuff like this leads to drama? Honestly, having people write down their lines and veils takes 2 minutes tops and is a net positive all around. The only people that get mad at this are the ones that still think Attack Helicopter is, like, remotely funny. 2024, current year. But if taking this step that takes no time and saves you a headache and the potential death of your campaign is to soy paled or whatever for you, go off, King, stay triggered or whatever. Okay, now that we've tackled the drama thing, let's move on to the real final boss of D&D campaigns.
So it's interesting. There's absolutely nothing wrong with, finding out where people get discomfortable and not going there. I mean, for instance, one of my very closest friends who avidly plays with me is a very devout Christian. And I would never in a million years, ever in a role-playing game, do something that was grossly offensive to Christianity, because he's one of my very best friends in the world, and I wouldn't want to hurt his feelings. It seems to me, I think, some of the issue comes from a play culture which focuses on playing with strangers, and with a life raised on the internet, where when people interact with strangers, they become kind of accustomed to anything goes on the net. And so then, if there aren't guardrails, then it's all fine. I was raised in a much more circumspect society, where the boundaries of what you would say in public were less. And so when I was playing with a stranger at a convention, I would absolutely err far on the side of what we would call conventionality and vanilla, and it wouldn't even occur to me to do something to push a boundary. So I suppose if you are playing with strangers, and if those strangers are the sort who think that there are no social rules, that I suppose you need something. I'm reminded a little bit of the problem our culture has now with how to dress when you go places. When I was younger, it was very clear. You had, black tie, you had formal, you had semi-formal. Then you introduced business casual, and things started to get confusing. And now, every time you go to a function, nobody knows how to dress. I went to a funeral the other day, and it ranged from people in black suits with black ties, to people in flip-flops and blue jeans at a funeral. And I was really appalled. Like, I felt offended on behalf of the deceased that people would show up to the funeral in blue jeans and flip-flops. Likewise, when I went to this black tie gala in Washington, D.C., accidentally forgot my black tie. And I was very, very stressed out, because I was like, what am I going to do? I can't go to a black tie gala without a black tie. And we drove to a Nordstrom's in the middle of downtown, and we rushed in before closing time, and I managed to buy a new bow tie. And then, of course, when I got to the black tie gala, there were just a huge percentage of the men were not in black tie. They were just dressed very casually. If I were running that gala, I would have turned them away at the door. So I suppose it's a long way of saying, if we live in this society where all of the old rules of what is permissible have been tossed out, then yeah, I guess you kind of have to do a little bit of work to say what the rules are going to be for your session. With The Escapist, our dress code had one rule, and that dress code was you had to wear pants. And people used to get upset at that, like, why can't I just come in pajamas? I'm like, no, you. And so we had one rule: you have to wear pants. Let's see. So I can't see the vein on his forehead, but I can feel it. Prescription soy pills, indeed. I made a devoted Catholic drink blood simulated fruit punch during a event. He didn't come back. I mean, sure, and fair, Vampire the Masquerade is probably a poor game to play if you were a devoted Catholic. I've seen the same being one girl in her dress for the club and others in pajamas. Yeah, it's a very strange phenomenon. So I noticed that. My friend Newton took me to church for Christmas Mass, and I was really shocked at the disparity of how people dress now. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think these are not safety tools. That's a great way. So thank you, Shock to Hit Points. Yeah, these are not safety tools because no one is unsafe. I reject the notion that being offended is unsafe, um, or being upset makes you unsafe. Safety is life and limb. Um, this is a code of etiquette. This is, respectable, civilized behavior among civilized human beings is what we're discussing. And our society's codes of etiquette have collapsed, and safetyism is taking its place. So when I was a kid, I had to wear a suit to get in a plane. Um, so that's interesting. I don't remember that, but I do remember being able to go hang out with the pilots in the cockpit when I was a kid on international flights. That was pretty cool. Um, yeah, Edens, I was surprised, particularly given that the tickets for this gala ranged from $500 to $20,000. Like there was no question the people who were going could certainly afford a black tie. It was a very deliberate decision. Brian James says, the ones I don't like most are cell phone loud conversations in restaurants, games, and public transit. Yeah, that has been a change which I have seen in my lifetime. Like it used to be if you saw someone wandering around the street loudly talking to themselves, you thought they were mentally ill. And now it just means they're on a Bluetooth headset. Alex, what an individual might owe the common weal is oppressive. Ah, yes, yes, yes. We live in a world that is reinventing social conventions in real time. Very strange. It is. It is very strange to see. It is very strange to see. Um, I feel a little bit like a stranger in a strange land. I'll tell you what's really interesting is for my wife because I think most of you guys know that, and it's not a secret. About 6 months, a year after I got married, my wife became very ill, and she was bedbound and homebound for the better part of 12 years thereafter. And thanks to some really good doctors and some breakthroughs and treatments, she's now living her life again. And so we're able to go out. We go to movies. We can go to concerts. We can go out to eat. We went to this gala. So it's been this huge sea change in our lives over the last 18 months. But for my poor wife, imagine that the last time you went out in public regularly was in 2009. And then you are taken from 2009 and just transported forward in time into 2024. And so we go to a restaurant and there's no menus. And the waiter's like, oh, you have to order on your phone. And she's like, what are you talking about? It's very strange. So pants, asking for pants is a lot in the Zoom era post-COVID. That is probably true. This Games was back 2007, 2008. At the time, I could still get away with asking for pants. The concept of a safe space is political intersectionalism. I believe it is. But there is nothing, as Joseph says, there's nothing wrong with politeness and decorum. I also agree with that. Needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful statement. But of course, you also have to draw the line on that because there are certain needs of the few or the one that I believe should be inalienable rights of the individual as well. And where you draw those lines is probably the most difficult balancing act in any society. Brian James, when they sent you home for work and didn't require dressing for work. Indeed. Listen, when I started working as a lawyer, the dress code was you had to wear either a blue suit or a gray suit. I was told I should buy them from Brooks Brothers, and the women had to wear pantsuits. There were no pants permitted for the women at Wachtell Lipton in the year 2000 when I started working. I imagine that's not the case anymore. I think the parents of yesteryear completely failed to teach, not just a bucking of societal trends. So I actually have a theory on this. There's you see this a lot when someone says, oh, boys will be boys or whatever. So there's this phenomenon where historically people behave a certain way and then they quote unquote grow out of it. And so because they grow out of it, people say, oh, well, they're going to grow out of it, so we don't have to worry about it. But it fails to understand that the reason they grew out of it is because they were forced to grow out of it by the discipline and the reprimand from society that gave them for behaving in those ways. And if you don't apply that discipline, if you don't apply the reprimand, they don't grow out of it. The growing out of it is not an inevitability, it's an effect of causal forces. It's similar to saying like, oh, the kids will just pick up reading. No, they will not. All right, let's return to Pointy Hat. and see what he has to say in the last bit. We're hitting into his climax.
5. The scheduling monster. I'm not sure you've noticed by the impossible number of unfunny scheduling memes floating around, but scheduling seems to be a problem for D&D players. Hard to believe that wrangling together a group of 5 people with jobs and or school to play at once, sometimes in the same space, for something along the lines of 5 hours is hard. Who would have thought?
Not me.
Now, there's surprisingly little advice on how to schedule.
So it is actually hilarious how hard it is, because for most of my youth, we would schedule Dungeons and Dragons in a world that had no cell phones. So if Brian was running late, you had no way to know that Brian was running late. He just didn't show up. If you had to change the venue, you had no particular way of getting in touch with people to let them know that the venue had to change. You could try ringing them at home, and you would let the phone ring, and sometimes people just wouldn't pick it up, and there'd be no way to leave a message for them. We were really excited when pagers were invented, and you could page someone, and then they would go to a Denny's and use the payphone in the Denny's. And yet it was easier to schedule games of Dungeons and Dragons back when I literally would sit like an idiot on my parents' phone and you know, and yet it was easier to get people together. So it's a very strange phenomenon.
And what I'm about to suggest is apparently not common advice, but here's what has worked for me. My credentials are I've DM'd many very, very long campaigns with all players that were all working adults with busy lives. And I've DM'd them to completion. No, not like that. Stop it. My veil. Okay.
Okay, that was actually pretty funny.
Here's a piece of advice. Be a hard ass. I know, right off the wheels of
He's 100% correct.
kindness and understanding and
No.
communication. This seems like a weird piece of advice to give. I straight up don't think that week-to-week scheduling, as in scheduling the next session at a different time each week, depending on the availability of people, works. Straight up. I don't think that's conducive to actually playing regularly. What
He's right.
I do when I start a campaign is during session 0, we all fill out a sheet with our available times. We look at where it does intersect, and that will be D&D time for every single week. No changes. Then I tell my players I take this pretend dragon game very seriously, and I put a lot of work in it.
Amen, brother.
So if they're not ready to schedule around this game, they're not welcome to play. Yes, it sounds
Amen. That's how you do it.
harsh, but I don't know, man. My campaigns have never had scheduling issues, like ever. I ask my players to make D&D a priority in the week, just like
Amen. That's how you do it.
I make going to the gym a priority, and many people make things like walking their dog or their war coffee run a priority. In my last campaign, which
Absolutely.
we played weekly in, we took 2 breaks, 1 2-week break for Christmas and 1 week break for convention stuff. None of the players were absent for more than 2 sessions in total outside of those breaks. We played for close to 18 months weekly. Out of 5 people, we played across 5 different time zones. We had people waking up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday to play D&D. That's what making a commitment is. Of course,
He's right. This is the best advice he's given in the whole video, and it's actually honestly worth watching the video just to get to this advice. This is the best advice he's given. You must be a hard ass about scheduling. You have to look at it like you're a little league coach, or you're the president of the bowling league, or whatever metaphor you want to use. But you are signing up for a commitment, and you must get people there. Scheduling things, people are used to keep their appointments when we had to wait by the phone to receive a call about where everyone was going to see a movie as the theater was sold. That's true. People did used to keep their appointments. Yeah.
if a major life event happens, like changes in jobs leading to changes of schedule, it's time to work out a new schedule for D&D. Once again, this is what works for me. You can think this is mean or whatever. I think it's commitment to a time-consuming hobby we all love. And my
No, this is not mean. This is you can tell this man has actually run long-term D&D campaigns. You can tell this is battle-scarred, hard-earned knowledge that he is sharing here. So kudos to him. Pointy hat. I'm sure we'd have a good time at a table, even if I thought you were running some sort of linear stuff. I would be impressed by your miniature collection and your terrain. I'll give you that for sure.
players agree. If being extremely lenient with people being late or not showing up at all didn't work, if changing the time you play D&D weekly at the whims of schedules of 5 people didn't work, maybe consider this. And please don't go mad with power with this, weirdo. And speaking of going mad with power, number 6, feedback. Okay, so this one is extra spicy. See, I went to a little hellspace called Arts, and
I'm not surprised by that, actually. That makes sense with the overall tone here.
this hellspace, I received a lot of a little type of torture called feedback. This actually was really, really good for me because feedback means nothing to me anymore. If I feel like it's constructive, I take it. If I feel like it isn't, I ignore it. If I feel like it can help me make whatever I'm working on better, I apply it. And if not, I don't. Having your peers and your teachers tell you exactly what they think of artwork you poured blood, sweat, and tears into, receiving that feedback every single day, having that work graded, having those grades decide if you pass the final year exam where 80% of students fail and are required to take the first year again, that will make you not internalize feedback really fast.
Wow, that sounds absolutely dreadful, and I'm glad I didn't go to art school.
Fortunately, most people don't go to art school, and thank God for that. But unfortunately, this means most people are not good at all at receiving feedback. And I regret to inform you that the only way I know to get better at receiving feedback is receiving feedback.
He is definitely correct. Most people are terrible about getting feedback. I saw this all the time as a boss at The Escapist. There was a very big generational gap as well. Gen Xers were much better at getting feedback than the millennials, and the Gen Z were even worse.
But if you're scared of
Although I wonder how much that has changed now because of comments and whatnot on internet videos. People can be so savage.
it, and let's be honest, most people are, you're gonna try to avoid receiving it at all costs. I'm here to tell you this. You can watch every single one of my videos. You can watch every possible video on D&D on YouTube. You can spend hours on Reddit reading horror stories and on funny memes, and you will not be better at playing or running this game unless you do it critically. You will learn from experience, of course, but you will learn much faster if you receive feedback while you do this. The key to receiving feedback is not to take it personally, which is easier said than done. A lot of people talk about how they like constructive criticism, and in my experience, this is not true. Most people don't like constructive criticism. Most people don't like criticism, period, because they see it as a personal attack, a value judgment, a critique against themselves, and not whatever is being critiqued, because they feel whatever is being critiqued is personal to them, so they take it personally. So someone criticizing it feels personal. How to get over this? Exposure therapy, baby. Get that feedback. But how? Well, if you're the DM...
So this is very interesting because he's absolutely correct. Exposure therapy is, in fact, how you overcome such things. But what's really interesting about it is this is the diametric opposite advice that he himself gave earlier with regard to things that make people uncomfortable, and in fact is the opposite to the advice that society as a whole is giving us about how to deal with people who have particular triggers, like anxiety and stress are caused by certain triggers, but the way one becomes less anxious and stressed about them is by exposure therapy to them and slowly working through those issues. So it's very strange because he clearly understands that getting feedback that makes you uncomfortable and working through it is how you improve. But he, at the same time, also embraces concepts of safety tools from a safetyist point of view rather than just from a state of view of politeness. So I'll have to ponder that. That's it's interesting.
You are in an advantageous position here.
I have the high ground.
You already do a ton more work than your players, so it's time to ask them for some work back. At the end of a session, message your players. Not during the session, I repeat, not during the session. After you're done, message them and ask them for their thoughts and feelings. Be specific, but don't ask too many questions, and insist on getting these answers. Be annoying. Remind them a day before the next game they haven't given you their answers back. If you have to spend time picking music, making stat blocks, choosing maps, painting minis, of whichever task of the 1,000 other tasks that can be involved in DMing, they can do this one thing for you. But what if you're a player? Well, you gotta ask nicely. I would actually not bother your DM, maybe just run this by them, and if they can fit it in their schedule, they'll do it. But don't harp on it. Instead, turn to other players. They're just not as busy as you are with D&D prep. Tell them it's important for you, that you want to get better, and ask them short and few questions. Now, is negative critique gonna hurt? Yeah, it will. And you need to sit with those feelings. Let them pass, and with time, they will hurt a little bit less every day, until you just hear them for what they are. Suggestions and opinions that you should most likely listen to, since you are most likely playing with people that love you and want you to be better at what you yourself want to be better. All this self-improvement thing is very nice and all, but it's easier said than done. What questions are you even asking when looking to receive feedback? I keep saying you should ask for short questions, and you should ask few questions, so what are they? Well, guess what? I asked them for you. In the description of this very video you're watching, you will find a set of feedback questions, very simple ones that you can send to your friends after a session if you want to improve. They are separated in two categories, if you're a DM and if you're a player. Look, everyone, homework. Isn't that fun? But what if homework is somehow unthinkable?
So this is interesting. I can't say that I've ever done anything as formalized as he's suggesting, but I certainly look for feedback from my players. But I'm mostly looking, because my focus so much is on game design, I'm mostly looking for feedback on the game design, and I kind of take my GMing for granted. But I think, probably when I was younger, I did solicit more feedback about actual GMing.
Incomplete, not fun for you. Well, what about a silly, goofy monster? I have this video on mimics. It has a brand new alternative to mimics. And if self-improvement is what you're after, here's a whole video on tips for the narrative side of D&D. Have fun with your homework, children. It will be graded.
All right, so that was an interesting video. That was pretty long, so thank you for the suggestion. That one came out of Discord. So let's see, we're at 9:57, so we probably got time to do one more, two more. So let's see what else I have on my queue here. Let's see.
Where they all just sort of stand above the rest. The A-list of the Monster Manual part. Unicorns, dragons.
All right, well, I mean, we got a beautiful picture of Paris Hilton, so that's a good way to start the video. I guess this is the problem with giants, and this is another one by Pointy Hat.
Werewolves, vampires. These are all monsters that are so established in popular culture that they just had to be in D&D too. Not having them in your fantasy dice clicking game makes it feel incomplete. Giants are in this category, or they should be.
Is that the guy from Lost?
So why are they just markedly less popular than any of the rest in the A-list? I'm Antonio D'Amico, this is Pointy Hat, and we're going to take a long, hard look at the biggest boys of D&D and try to give them a popularity booster seat in this brand new episode of D&D with a Twist, Giant Edition.
right, so this one's 25 minutes. Since we already watched one by Pointy Hat, maybe we should watch another. So maybe we'll come back to this one. Let's see what else I have in the queue.
Full 3d6 table
All
to
right, so
generate
this
traps.
is GFC's D&D, a treatise on traps, how to make traps for D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. All right, so we'll put the speed up a little bit on this one here. He has kind of an NPR voice.
Each trap has 3 basic characteristics: the mechanism, the consequence, and the tell. The mechanism is how the trap is activated. Referees should interpret these results loosely.
All right, so I like this guy already. He's dividing things up in a logical format here. I can almost feel the spreadsheet coming through.
For example, a weight differential could mean an Indiana Jones style trap where removing an idol from a plinth releases a boulder, or it could be a rickety
Also, great vocabulary. Plinth, top notch.
bridge that will collapse if a PC is over a certain level of encumbrance. False mechanisms could mean fake doors that fall and crush anyone attempting to open them, or chest mimics that chomp greedy treasure hunters. Consequences are self-explanatory. Be creative in how you approach them. A crushing trap might cause rocks to fall on PCs, or it might mean that their hand is maimed if they reach into a cubby. Displacement traps can be stairs that turn into chutes, portcullises that split parties from one another, or even magical teleport traps. The tell is how a PC can be expected to figure out that something is trapped. For example, too old or too new might be a row of canopic jars, which when inspected will reveal that one of the jars is free of any dust, and the jar is actually a trap set to ward against tomb robbers that will release ghosts when opened. When the referee chooses to reveal the tell depends on the experience of the players and the consequences of the trap.
All right, so it's interesting here. So this is great advice. So far, I'm very impressed. So this is GFC's D&D. I'm seeing in the comments that a lot of you guys know who this is. Vector Corbin says, I like GFC. Bard says, I like his exploration advice. So why does this man only have 3.35K subscribers and the other fellow has 400,000 subscribers? I would imagine because the other fellow has all sorts of fancy video editing and sort of sounds like Antonio Banderas when he talks. But let's continue.
Deadly traps should generally be more obvious, unless dealing with an experienced group. For a first session, or for the first trap in a dungeon, the referee might immediately warn players that, for example, there are holes in the walls of this hallway, indicating a dart or poison gas trap. For more experienced players, the referee might simply note that vines grow up the walls in this hallway, and leave it to the players to carefully inspect the vines and notice the holes hidden behind them. I approach hiding and revealing traps by taking inspiration from the old text-based computer adventure games like Zork, where I'll describe very simply the notable features of a room, which Appendix I in the AD&D DMG is invaluable for. If players more carefully inspect and interact with these features, I will give.
So again, this is great. So he's referencing old school Zork, which had a lot of lessons for how you could create environmental traps. He's mentioning Appendix I of the AD&D DMG. This is solid. I like this guy.
More clues. For a particularly devious trap, I might obfuscate it under multiple layers. For example, a player might wish to inspect a conspicuously expensive tapestry. If they peek behind it, it reveals an unworked stone wall, and inspecting that unworked stone wall reveals that it has been knocked down and built back up many times, which might indicate perhaps a boulder or log trap hidden behind the wall, which could be confirmed by damage to the opposite wall or bits of stone scattered about the room. The point is to force players to use context clues and lateral thinking to reveal the nature of the trap. There might also be multiple clues leading to the same trap. For example, the stone scattered about the room in the previous example. As for how players can thwart traps, I find it's best to simply leave it up to the players. More often than not, they will come up with an ingenious way to disarm or avoid the trap that you would have never thought of yourself, and it saves on prep work for you. Besides, having one and only one way to avoid a trap can lead to frustrating experiences for the players as they try to divine your thought process. Placement of traps is also crucial.
So it seems like he's probably using a system which has more of a rulings over rules approach, which kind of encourages you to take the answer is not in the character sheet approach to how to solve problems, which is fine. That's a valid way to play. My only criticism of that way to play is that I think people don't necessarily actually perceive things automatically. I definitely can see the difference between myself, which is a sort of fairly trapped in my own head, low awareness person, versus some of my friends who are basically Vietnam Special Forces point men who detect everything at every moment. Or likewise, not everyone is mechanically capable of doing the things that they say they would do. Like, I can certainly buy IKEA furniture. I can read the instructions for IKEA furniture, but it will take me 16 hours to assemble a 2-hour piece of IKEA furniture, whereas my brother will get it done in 30 minutes. So I still think there's a place for character skill as well as player skill in such situations.
Traps can be fun and exciting, and a dungeon might be dull without them and encourage recklessness. However, too many traps can result in players being afraid to interact with a single feature of your dungeon and slow the pace of the game to the point where it's boring and frustrating. Using wandering monster rolls to force players to move at a decent clip will further frustrate them when they're forced by the clock to blunder into a trap. So, to encourage player agency in deciding how and when
Player agency. So one of the things I feel good about is the extent to which player agency is now widely discussed in RPG circles. When I wrote the first draft of Arbiter of Worlds, which was in my Check for Traps series of articles on the Escapist back in 2010, no one was talking about it. Like, it was essentially an alien concept, and people would vigorously argue with me on the forums about it. And I feel like we've come a really long way, so that makes me feel good.
to check for traps, referees must be logical in their placement of those traps. Defensive choke points might be trapped, as well as
I think this is really good advice. I've never been one to believe that you should just arbitrarily place traps as a means to, give the FU to players. I think that's bad design, and that isn't how people built traps in the real world.
treasure rooms. In my opinion, it's more fun for players to thwart a trap that they know about than it is to find a trap that they didn't know about. I usually say
So I would differ slightly there. I think sometimes discovering the trap itself is interesting information because it clues you in that there's something to protect there.
by following the old rule. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. When my players find a golden statuette atop a plinth that's surrounded by dried bloodstains, they know to carefully inspect every feature of the room. Trapping too many mundane rooms can lead to a boring arms race between the referee and the player. Last room we entered, a slime fell on us from above, so now we note that we're always checking the ceiling when we enter. Well, to thwart the players, the referee places a pit trap inside the room. Well, now we're always checking the ceiling and we're prodding the ground with our 10-foot pole. Okay, well then the referee places a crossbow trap in the next room that fires when the door is open. All right, now we specify that we stand to the side of the door when we open it, and we check the ceiling before entering, and we prod the floor with our poles. Well, now the referee electrifies the door handle, so now we put a rag over the handle before we open it, and we stand to the side, and we check the ceiling, and we prod the floor, and for 60 rooms. This is a waste of time. Even though traps are...
All right, so what's interesting here is that in a world where traps exist, people would develop these sort of standard operating procedures. But what anyone who has ever been in the military knows is that in conditions of war, where people are low on sleep, where they're stressed, where they're hurried, where they're anxious, often standard operating procedure gets ignored, either on purpose or accidentally by oversight, and flight checklists aren't followed, and failures occur. And so this is why you need to have skill checks, because the players can say that at every moment, my character always performs this detailed 60-point list of checking for traps with absolute focused attention. But the character probably doesn't do that. The character is a human being in a world filled with stress and anxiety and sweat and misery. And I mean, to use a silly example, I'm gonna just say my character reads the ACKS II rule book and spots all the typos and corrects them, so there's no typos when it goes to print. Well, I can say that, but apparently I couldn't do that because I have a whole section of my Discord filled with typos, right? So like it is much easier to say certain things than it is to do them. And this is the main problem with the Mother May I style of play. And he's calling it an arms race, but I think it's not so much an arms race as it's fundamentally just a misapprehension of where to draw the line between player skill and character skill. And you cannot draw the line on player skill because then it creates this arms race. You have to draw the line over on the character skill side of things. Same thing is true with surprise rolls, right? Like, people will be like, I can't be surprised because when I enter the room, I look up, I look left, I look right, I check for this. You're like, no, okay. That's obviously no one thinks they're going to be surprised. Surprise, by definition, happens despite you not expecting it. That's what makes it surprise.
Or a negative experience for the characters, they should be a positive experience for the players. I cannot stress this enough. My players have fun discovering, thwarting, and even sometimes getting caught by the traps that I place in my dungeon because they're placed in a fair and logical manner that doesn't make them afraid to walk down any 10-foot stretch of hallway without first tediously checking for traps. Think of traps like the inverse of puzzles. Rather than solving a problem for a reward, they're solving a problem to avoid a consequence. But the fun of it for the players is in the problem solving, not in arbitrarily being taxed resources for simply exploring the dungeon, which is what should be encouraged in the first place. While recklessness should be curtailed, exploration and interaction is the point of the game. If traps...
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think there's good advice there. But I don't think that every aspect of the game and every moment needs to be fun, in the same sense that not every moment of a horror movie should be scary. Like, it's okay to actually have some things that make the players a little bit irritated by what just went down, because that then makes the success that much sweeter. All right, so let's see. Handling roles. Let's see what he has to say here.
Traps can be detected and evaded by interaction. What's the point of rolls? In my home games, we rarely roll to detect or remove traps.
All right, so this is as I predicted. He has the line drawn over on the player skill side because he doesn't see the point in rolling.
In a strict interpretation of the rules, a thief's chance to find or remove traps is for small mechanical traps such as a poison needle trap and a lock, essentially traps that are difficult to detect or disarm by interacting with the world. Regardless, I find myself using less of these types of traps and therefore encroaching on the thief's design space a little bit, so I suggest giving the thief some buffs here and there to even it out.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So he has shifted the parameters to be player skill and then discovered that he's made thieves less useful. My solution to this is that I do think you should follow his advice. You should give them information about the world. You should place traps in logical places. But in ACKS, what we did is you have hasty detection of traps, which can occur automatically and assumes you're following standard operating procedure. And then we have methodical detection of traps, which takes 10 minutes, requires more time, and gives you much more chance to succeed. And so you can be assumed to be doing your hasty checking for traps. And so the thief always has a chance to detect those traps. And then when the player, because he's been paying attention, because the GM has done a good job of giving those clues, the player knows it's time to spend a little bit more attention. Then you can switch to the methodical system, and the discovery, the success or not, is determined by the die roll. And the way, so this raises the question, well, Alex, what if the person is perfectly convinced that they just know that it's a particular type of trap, so they don't want to search a 10-foot by 10-foot area, they just want to search the specific mechanism for where they think the trap is, and they're correct. And so what I will generally do in that circumstance is I will give them a bonus, like let's say an additional +4 for the time spent. But if the check succeeds and the trap wasn't in that particular location, then they don't find it at all. So for instance, so let's say they come upon a door and they say, I don't think the door is trapped based on the description you gave. I bet the door handle is trapped. So I'm only going to search that door handle for 10 minutes. So then what I would do is I would make the roll. I would give them, let's say, a +4 bonus on that die roll. But if they succeeded and the doorknob was trapped, well, they found out they had an easier time with the roll because of their good player skill. If they succeeded, but the doorknob wasn't trapped and it was the door that was trapped and the player erred, then the player's error has overruled the character skill. And this works really, really well. So I write about this in the Judge's Journal. I'm sure you guys have all seen my other videos on it. But anyway, I like GFC overall. I think he's probably a little bit more on the rulings over rules side than I am, but overall, good video.
I encourage you to roll in this table a few times and post any traps you come up with in the comments. On the screen are a few examples from myself. You can also create your own tables to generate unique traps, and I'd love to see any you come up with yourself, so please post them in the comments as well. Thank you for.
Yeah, good video. Good video. So let's see what our users have to say. Yep. And now it needs to be a time impetus, so players have to make a decision within a reasonable time. Very important. Let's see. Caught up to the stream at 2x speed. All those videos were super fast. That's hilarious. So you were watching them at like 3.5 speed. I'd like to be able to have the kind of traps he's talking about. For me, that's a large intellectual barrier. Yeah, it can definitely be an intellectual barrier. It's a challenge. Yep, repetition becomes normalized, but stress and being tired allow things like NDs to happen at a hopefully small percentage. Being there and doing things, especially under duress, creates potential failure. Yeah, this is absolutely the case. I mean, I'll give you a great example of this from my own life. When I was at West Point, Camp Buckner, you go on this thing called Infantry Week. And in Infantry Week, you sort of, they deploy you out of a helicopter and you start your week and you're just out in the field as an infantryman for a full week. And you're getting almost no sleep because you're awake during sunup and you're awake during sundown, and in between is about 8 hours and you're at 50% guard duty. So you're maybe getting 3 hours of sleep a night. And so a couple days in, you're a zombie. And we got put on an ambush. So we were given our location in the ambush. We were all set into our position, and all you have to do is wait for the Op 4. They are going to walk down the road, and then all you have to do is shoot them with your guns, and it's miles gear and you win. But let me tell you, actually staying alert for that long a period of time, even though enemy are going to walk down the road in front of you, it's really hard. I did not succeed. I was totally zoned out when the Op 4 showed up, and I did not pull the trigger until well after the firefight began because I was just probably for the best that I never became an infantryman. Let's see. Whenever there's a suspicious area in my game, my players take a 10-foot pole wherein they stand 10 feet away from the problem and take votes on what to do. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. My problem with the 10-foot pole is how would one trigger a trap that's likely meant to go off on the weight of a person when at that distance a person can't push that hard with the pole? Yeah, so that's a great question, Negative Space, and I think you would just have to decide that, this trap only goes off if the weight of a person. The way I've handled that is I've done things like I've said, this trap goes off if a weight of 20 stone or more passes. And so if a character weighs 15 stone and only has 3 stone of encumbrance, he's just not going to set it off. But if he's got, if he's got 6 stone of encumbrance, he will. So I think there's different ways you can do it. Glad to hear you elaborate your take. Yeah, I have really strong opinions on this. I think the rulings over rules, Mother May I, is a trap that you can get caught in. And I think, GFC is actually kind of acknowledging that when he talks about how it can spiral into an arms race. But the solution to getting out of that arms race is the solution that ACKS has adopted. My feel is the best traps are the 1 per dungeon type. Barrow Maze was hell with standard operating procedures. Yeah, for sure. Like having unique traps. Yeah. I'd love to get to. Yeah, it was good fun. Yes, I would absolutely like if someone said, hey, the group wants you to run OSE or something, I would just port that right over from ACKS. There's no reason not to, and it's completely compatible. You can find hollow spaces, etc. Using a pole works well on concrete. It's less setting off the trap and more discovering it. Yes, that's correct. That's correct. In ACKS, the way it works is that by using a 10-foot pole, instead of searching in a 5-foot radius around yourself, you can search out to 10 feet from yourself. So it's a nice advantage. All right, so let's see what else we got here on our list of videos to watch.
Popular role-playing game by a pretty comfortable margin. It's a bestseller and has become a huge touchstone both in the cultural zeitgeist and in the realms and stores where we play our role-playing games. Dungeons & Dragons is the big guy on
He speaks too slowly, so I've sped him up.
the block, but the fact of the matter remains, I don't play Dungeons & Dragons anymore. Hi, I'm Kyle. I'm the dork, and for most of you, I imagine this is the first time you're seeing my face. Hi, how you doing? I wanted to start this new year off with this video because it was one that you requested a while ago. I got sick over the break, and it made it impossible for me to record or work, which was really hard for me. And I wanted to start the new year off swinging, and this was a video that had been widely requested. So before we get started, I want to talk about what this video will not be.
This is really sad music. Like he's talking about being sick, and there's like sad music playing, and he doesn't play D&D anymore. I feel like this is like the beginning of a really sad show.
If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, this video is not going to be me trashing you or saying that you're bad for liking this game. I understand that D&D has gotten a great number of folks into role-playing games and storytelling games in general, and I think that
I don't know if I like him anymore. He said it's gotten people into role-playing games and storytelling games. I guess that's fair. No, I shouldn't be judgmental. They are distinct genres, and it probably has gotten people into both. So I take it back. I still like it.
In totality, I think it's been a good thing for the tabletop hobby. But for
Definitely.
myself and for a number of other GMs that I know, it's become a system that we loved, and it's not a system that we love any longer. Now, part of the reason I want to address this with my actual
Fair.
face is there's a personal connection that I have to D&D. Many of the personal connections that I enjoy, both professionally and among my friends, I owe to this game. But the fact of the matter remains,
Same here, brother.
I have lost the love that I had for D&D.
The feels in this episode are big. I'm getting big feels.
So this is not going to be me trashing the people who like it, or in many cases, the designers who work hard on it, the companies that make great supplements for it. And one more thing, before we get too far into this, I'm going to co-opt some arguments. A lot of people in the comments when I do these videos generally tend to respond with something like, you're a bad GM, or you can just fix this, or you can change these things. I am aware that I can change anything at a table, and that most of the time the experience is on me. However, my arguments and my opinions are that Dungeons & Dragons as a system has enough flaws and issues present in it that I don't want to have to do it. Or to quote another person that I know who's a published game designer, at some point, making the game work on the first try is not my job. It's yours. But before we start, I have to talk about what D&D does well, because I need to co-opt another argument that I get quite a lot when I do these videos, and I try to critique.
This guy, you can tell, man, he's been shell-shocked by the comments, right? Like he's responding to the comments before the comments have even gotten started. So this is Desks and Dorks. I'm not familiar with him, but I like him. I'm going to give him a subscribe. I like him. He's got a good vibe. I'm having big feels.
or dissect something that has a rabid fan base, a fan base that enjoys it, one of the things that comes up often is, oh, I clearly don't have an understanding of or appreciation for the thing that I am critiquing. I have played Dungeons and Dragons in some way, shape, or form since I was 8 years old. I began in 3rd edition, but I played every single edition. And
See, that's great. So like me, he was a childhood prodigy of D&D. All the D&D greats started when they were like 5 to 8 years old. It's like chess wizards.
stopped at 5th, and I believe my critique comes from a place both of appreciation for the game and understanding of it. But before we start into a critical dissection, I have to talk about what Dungeons & Dragons does well, because in understanding the game's strengths, we can better understand and critique its weaknesses. The first thing that D&D does very, very well is its simplicity. Underneath all of the different pages, all of the handbooks, the supplements, the campaign settings, the stuff on Roll20 and D&D Beyond that you can layer and layer and layer on top of the character, of the prestiges and all of the complexity, is a very simple foundation. Roll the 20-sided die, high number good, low number bad. I recently got to play 5th edition with a group of players, many of whom had either not played in a number of years, and some of whom had only begun playing for the first time. And despite their confusion about the modifiers, about what their character could and could not do, their difficulty in parsing some of the rules, they could come to a fundamental understanding that as long as the roll of a 20-sided dice was high enough, they could do whatever it is they wanted. This is a very simple vehicle to imagination. A D20 is not simply a dice, it is a portal to another dimension, and an understanding of that D20 is not something you have to have a college-level math degree or an understanding of advanced mechanics to make work. It is what Dungeons & Dragons does best, because I can seriously just hand a 20-sided die to a 4th grader, and I can say, if you want to hit the troll, you have to roll high enough, and this is a true...
Aha! He has acknowledged the fundamental greatness of the throw system. That's right. Thank you.
And excellent strength. Another one of the ones that I think has allowed Dungeons & Dragons to continue its dominance of the role-playing game landscape is that it is culturally and historically entrenched. I think it is very difficult to explain to people that we are just now beginning to have a role-playing game renaissance. Before Dungeons & Dragons, there were role-playing games to be sure, and people have always played pretend, but D&D is the one to do it the biggest and hit the main stage first and the hardest. And as a result of that, Dungeons & Dragons enjoys a cultural cachet.
All right, so we'll skip this part. We know that it's entrenched. And I'm sure he's right about WotC's issues as a company. I'm more interested in his design thoughts, so I'm going to jump forward and see what he says for the D20 system is fundamentally flawed. So let's see. So he says the system sucks for role playing. Okay, well this sounds controversial. Let's see what that's about.
The core of this boils down to a couple different things, but I want to start with our base foundation, and that is the fact that D&D's system does not support role-playing in the way that I want. When I want you to consider Dungeons & Dragons, I want you to think of it not as a game system or as even as a canvas, as I had laid out earlier, but as an amusement park, a place that the player, in this case a guest of the amusement park, can come in and experiment with the rides in however they wish. But a theme park has themes, it has areas. You might think of Disney World.
It's very interesting. So those of you who've read Arbiter of Worlds know that I talk about 2 ways of viewing your game world. And one is as a safari where you're interacting in the real world with real dangers. And the other is as a theme park. So it's kind of interesting that his take on D&D is that it's a theme park. Let's see where he goes with this.
World, for example, and I don't even think Dungeons & Dragons does that much to guide or help cultivate its player base. No, I think D&D is a lot like a state fair where there's just an assortment of rides and you can pick and choose what you want. Now, this approach is great and it is accessible. That is another strength of Dungeons & Dragons as a system, its accessibility and its invitation to all players to come in and experiment and enjoy however or whatever they might be playing around with. However, here is the problem and here's my issue. I want you to consider for a moment, what does Dungeons & Dragons as a game system, not what the GM is doing, not what your fellow players are doing, not what great module writers are doing, but what does Dungeons & Dragons, the core rules, do to encourage its player base to make nuanced decisions in storytelling, character creation, or player interaction? Because my answer to that is I don't think much. When I consider Blades in the Dark, for example, another role-playing game that I have come to greatly enjoy, it encourages adaptability. That is the one key word I think of when I think of Blades in the Dark that comes as a part of its flashback mechanic. It encourages players to adapt rather than to plan, and to shape stories rather than to plan around a pre-existing narrative because of the flashback mechanic. If something goes wrong, all I have to do is call for a flashback, and all of a sudden, I, not the GM, not my fellow players at the table, is the one shaping the narrative. This allows me as a player to consider not, what's going on in the rulebook or in the charts, but what I think would make for an exciting tale. That narrative adaptation on the fly, is something that feeds into the excitement and the fantasy of playing as a dashing, swashbuckling rogue, a ne'er-do-well, hopping along the rooftops of this haunted city. There are systems and frameworks that offer and facilitate interesting storytelling, and I just don't think Dungeons & Dragons is doing enough to push its players in those nuanced directions. D&D, in its interest of being accessible to as many players as possible, does nothing to challenge those players or to encourage them along nuanced storytelling paths. I want you also to consider, for example, Dread, another one of my favorite role-playing games. Dread encourages...
Okay, so this is interesting. So he... what he's actually presenting here, and he isn't coming out and saying it, but he's presenting is the Forge theory, which is that there are different agendas that a role-playing game can have, and that one of those is storytelling or narrative, and that the game needs to be coherent with regard to what it is pushing players to do, and that games that try and be all things to all players are not good games. That's straight out of Forge theory. Dread, the RPG, was created by someone who is a fan of the Forge theory. And the idea that, games should be challenging you to be a better narrativist is straight out of Forge Theory. So I don't know if he knows that it's straight out of Forge Theory. I have no idea, but it's interesting to see. Ideas have consequences, and Forge Theory, GNS theory, was a very consequential theory for our industry that shaped how a lot of people view things.
The players to buy into the narrative because of the Jenga tower that it is based around. As the Jenga tower teeters, as it totters, as players continue to move bricks around or blocks around, they are forced to consider the impact and the weight of their actions. And there is a real, tangible connection between the impact of the player's actions in the real world and the impact of the player's actions in game. I don't need to explain or show you a chart or have you look at 9 different pages of rules in order for you to understand you are in very real, very critical danger. You can look at the Jenga tower as it sways and understand that your decisions in game have impact. Again, this is a systemic and rules-driven choice that this system, Dread, is making to encourage players to buy into the fantasy that it creates. Dread is
So, this is interesting because I've played Dread many times. I have a lot of friends who really like storytelling games, and Jason Morningstar, who wrote Fiasco, actually used to live near us and used to come and run games. And I wouldn't describe Dread that way at all, actually. In fact, I think the Jenga tower is completely disassociated because there's nothing you can do in the game world of Dread to avoid pulling at the Jenga tower or to give yourself a better chance to pull at the Jenga tower. It's just essentially playing a game of Jenga where eventually the tower is going to collapse as you sort of tell the story with your friends.
a horror game that aims to create tension, and its rules and the way that the game is set up creates that tension for the players. My argument is that Dungeons & Dragons, in its rules and systems, fails to do this. Fiasco is another great example. In terms of the players' buy-in, Fiasco, which in many cases touts itself as kind of being a movie scene, a Coen Brothers movie, encourages the players who are not active movers in a scene to play as the audience, determining whether or not a scene goes well or poorly.
Yeah. All right. So Desks. What is this guy's name? Desks and Dorks is definitely a Forge theorist or story gamer. So this is interesting.
For the characters involved therein, by thus increasing not only the buy-in from the other players, but allowing it to feel like it's a movie and encouraging the players to make choices they wouldn't normally make. Because again, this isn't life or death. These are the goofy and in some cases tragically flawed characters who have more ambitions and no impulse control. These are not real people that we have to care about. And I think that framing device of allowing other players in order to get into those scenes has that same impact. These are three games whose rules and systems encourage nuanced storytelling, player interaction, and greater thinking and a greater depth of role-playing in a way that I don't feel like Dungeons & Dragons does, or even in my reflections, has ever done. But
so I don't actually think that Fiasco promotes role-playing in the slightest, because in Fiasco, you're not actually putting yourself in the role of the person in the Coen Brothers movie. You're putting yourself in the role of the director and co-creator and co-producer of a Coen Brothers movie. And your reward for playing the Fiasco is the hilarious things that occur in the movie. It's a great example that I like to use is if you are driving down the street and you pass a spooky house, you actually don't want your car to break down in front of the spooky house and force you to go knock on the door for help, because that would be dramatic and exciting. You as the driver just want to go home. You're driving home from work and you just want to go home. And so, but a storytelling game forces you to say, no, it would be dramatically interesting for my car to break down now. So I'm going to use my story point to have my car break down so my character goes into the spooky house. And so it takes you out of playing the role of a person who just wants to go home, and it puts you into the role of an author. So which is why I think storytelling games are very different than role-playing games. And the Forge, I believe, did us a great wrong as an industry by conflating the two.
But as foundational as these issues are, as much as I feel like Dungeons & Dragons does not, in its systems, encourage the type of deeper player interaction that I'm really looking for.
So he's right. Dungeons & Dragons does not encourage these sort of interactions. But I guess where I would disagree is I don't think that's a flaw of D&D.
I think the problem and the flaw goes even deeper than that. You see, for as wonderful and as simple as the D20 system is, the D20 system is part of the major problem. You see, when we use the D20 system, we are encouraging a pass-fail, a binary system of choices that I find to be uninteresting, and I would argue cause the story to go into a stalemate, or at the very least, to go into a very boring direction. And I'm going to explain exactly what I mean by that.
Okay, so he's gonna essentially here, he's gonna recommend that you have the systems which are the yes and systems or the no but systems, and where you every success comes with a small setback, or every failure comes with a chance for redemption, et cetera, et cetera. This is straight out of Forge theory.
Let's consider a player in the middle of mountain climbing in a D20 system like Pathfinder or like Dungeons & Dragons. The DM calls for a roll, a simple 15, in order for them to scale the side of the peak. They fail. What happens in this instance? Do they fall and thus are forced to make the check again, which is just merely stasis? If they're not under duress in a D20 system, they might just continue to do that over and over again. Do they fall and take a horrific amount of damage, thus injuring themselves and potentially eliminating part of this possibility, part of this problem, part of this issue? Or do they just remain on the side of the canyon? Either way you slice it, the player is forced to engage in either a completely new way of thinking, which could lead to something interesting, but if the player had a cool plan or an intriguing idea, or they were looking to, I don't know, engage in part of the core fantasy.
No, I'm not deleting the stream now. right. Yeah, we're definitely out into the wild world.
Of their character, say for example a rock climbing or far ranging barbarian, or a ranger that likes to scale cliffs in order to scout out new terrain. If they're trying to play out a core fantasy of it, being forced to take a completely new tack removes them from that fantasy, and if they're forced to just continue to roll over and over and over again, the story has just reached stasis. Ultimately, the D20 is the problem and is to blame here. A simple pass-fail on a D20 system isn't just boring, I think it's bad for good storytelling. The binary solution of this is what causes the story, and I would argue the game itself, to stagnate. In other systems, a failed roll is an opportunity for growth, player agency, or greater creativity. And as one person actually put it, and I really like this, when you are allowing systems that force the player to fail forwards or fail interestingly, you are allowing them to shape the story, or giving yourself as a GM another opportunity to shift or change the story in new and interesting ways. Let's take a
All right, so I don't think we need to finish the rest of this video. It's 10:30, which is when I usually end these, and it's pretty obvious that Mr. Destin Dorks is a enthusiast of story games who has personally adopted the the Forge approach. So fail forward and fail interestingly and achieve personal growth, etc. This is not how I design games. I don't subscribe to their philosophy, but they have a philosophy. They have made games. They have achieved their level of success that they've achieved. So I don't really want to trash talk or badmouth my fellow gamers. They're welcome to, do what they wish, but this isn't sort of how I run. So this was interesting for me, guys. A couple things that jump out, and then we'll just take a look at the comments and then wrap things up. So obviously, a lot of really slickly produced D&D content being made, RPG content being made. Clearly, a lot of these folks either have teams or are spending hours and hours a week I don't have doing editing for their videos. Some really, really impressive work there. Interesting that the creator I most resonated with was the one that had the fewest subscribers. Probably not a good sign for me, but is what it is. Although Destin Dorks has 10,000 subscribers, that's not really an order. It's about half order of magnitude bigger than me. That's not a huge difference. So, and I'm not really sure why. I imagine it probably just has to do, some of it is just luck, some of it is skill at playing the algorithm, some of it is production value, and then some has been hitting the zeitgeist of sort of who you reach. So I'm not really sure what makes the biggest difference. Some of it might just be the personality of the people. There are people that are easier to watch on camera than others. There are people that have more charisma than others, and I'm sure that matters. So, all right, so let's see. Let's take a look at some comments here, and then we'll wrap it up. So he is going to my exact point, not planning for failure, plan for success. At least it's an ethos. Yep. I don't think the variety of more than a pass fail is dependent on the system, but dependent on the game master. It's dependent on the game master. It's dependent on the scenario. And the thing is like degrees of success. Any statistician will tell you you can use pass-fail results to model a bell curve or anything else you want. It's just a matter of where you structure the pass-fail and how many times you run the iteration. So for instance, climb check is pass-fail, but if it's can you get to the mountain within a certain time limit, and fail means you don't progress and pass means you do progress, and then you have different routes you can choose from, like you can build that out to whatever complexity you get. There's nothing wrong with that. Story games, more like boring games, am I right? Please clap. No, I've had good fun playing story games. I mean, when Jason Morningstar ran Fiasco, he's a really talented game master, and I've had fun. I ran 316 Carnage Amongst the Stars for my friends, and we had fun. Story games to me, I feel like I don't know. It's like eating, it's like eating cheap carbs, right? Like. You sort of you gorge on them, but they don't really satisfy me in the long term. They don't build the lean muscle. Let's see. I'm not convinced editing makes the biggest difference. Yeah, I'm not either. So, hi, Max. Yep, that was my dog. Doesn't he want to have a meaningful campaign? Yes, I know, right? Alex, this has been like watching a stasis-bound man waking up to a techno barbarian. Well, as I said, I genuinely don't watch D&D YouTube very much. Maybe I'm just like a smug asshole and I'm too self-assured in my own beliefs. But I've put as much thought into the philosophy of game mastering as I think as anyone on the planet. So yeah. Lack of timekeeping and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. It's true. Any chance you can get Raggy on one of these? Yeah, probably. James Raggy and I have known each other for many years. Through ups and downs of council culture, he and I have always been on good terms. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as both a publisher and a designer. He was good enough to work with me on Guns of War and let us look at and use the Lamentations of the Flame Princess firearms rules. So I like Raggy. I don't know if he'd come on my show. Just it is what it is. But I would certainly be happy to have him. The saddest words of tongue or pen. Gary Gygax was right again. Dan, I love that you made that a rhyming couplet. Negative space. I think some people have more subscribers because their content appeals to more people. Like more people are going to sit and watch American Idol than something specific. That makes sense. That makes sense. Probably modern culture with the idea of calling something a failure is unacceptable, which fails to acknowledge that failure is one of the important means of growth. It's true. It's true. So, all right, guys. Well, this was my first ever experience doing reactions on YouTube. I hope you had fun. I had fun. It was interesting. It was a fresh change. Excuse me. Not intending to say change the show format or anything. I just didn't have a guest book for tonight. And I didn't want to do a lazy cop out and not do a show. So I said, hey, let me do reacts. But I would do these again. This was good fun. If there's folks you think I should react to, let me know in the comments. If you thought it was stupid, let me know in the comments or Discord or whatever. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And there's like an alarm bell I think you're supposed to press or something. I don't know. I actually don't understand what the deal is because I subscribe to channels and YouTube never shows them to me. It just seems to randomly pick channels and it's like, we think you'd like this. And I'm like, okay. So I don't know. But whatever magic algorithm supportive thing you're supposed to do for me, please do that so that I get more traffic and then I become big on the internet and can sell more copies of ACKS II and make the world a better place. On that happy note, I will catch you guys all again next week on ACKS to Grind and, of course, on the ACKS Discord and other cool places. All right. Thanks, guys.